You know, sometimes a victory can be so clean, so perfect, that it actually triggers a strategic disaster. It sounds like a paradox, right? Well, let's dive into this really fascinating and honestly kind of chilling analysis of a hypothetical event that the source material calls the Noriega Trap. I want you to just picture this for a second. It's January 3rd, 2026. It's dark, pre-dawn. U.S. Special Forces are descending on Caracas, Venezuela. But their target isn't some terrorist leader hiding in a compound. No, it's a sitting head of state. And they pull it off. In one surgical strike, they extract Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. And then, boom, almost immediately the confirmation hits social media. It's a clear, undeniable win from a tactical point of view. But here's the central question, the one this whole analysis is built around. What if the victory itself is the trap? Okay, so to understand the fallout, we have to look at the justification for this whole thing. The entire operation is banking on a precedent set way back in 1989. But what the analysis argues is that 2026 is a completely different world, and relying on the past is exactly what creates this so-called Noriega Trap. So how in the world do you legally justify abducting another country's president? Well, the source explains the U.S. legal strategy is to basically rebrand the entire Venezuelan government. They're not a government, they're a narco-terrorist group called the Cartel of the Suns. And the goal here is to strip them of what's called sovereign immunity. That's the international rule that says you can't just drag another country's leader into your own courts. The idea is if Maduro isn't a president but a cartel boss, well, then that protection just vanishes. And this is where that whole 1989 comparison just completely falls apart. Back in '89, you had a unipolar world with the U.S. as the only superpower. They were targeting an unelected dictator, and they had a lot of support in the region. But in 2026, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a multipolar world, Maduro's actually a UN-recognized president, and this move is met with, you guessed it, widespread condemnation. The chessboard is just not the same. And the analysis is, well, it's pretty blunt about the legal side of this. According to the international law experts cited in the source, this isn't just bending the rules, it's taking a sledgehammer to them. It breaches the UN Charter's most basic rule against using force, it has zero UN Security Council approval, and it completely flies in the face of the global agreement on immunity for heads of state. And look, this isn't some fringe opinion. The source points to experts like Mark Weller from the very prestigious Chatham House, who just calls it what it is, an abduction with no justification under international law. It sends a signal that, in this scenario, the U.S. has pretty much decided the rules just don't apply to it anymore. All right, so the legal ground is shaky at best. But what about the prize? The oil, right? The stated goal, according to the source, is to get all that Venezuelan oil flowing again. But the analysis here points to a very, very harsh economic reality that gets in the way. First, just look at this number. To get Venezuela's oil industry back to where it once was could require up to $183 billion in new investment. We're talking decades of neglect that have left the entire infrastructure, pipelines, refineries, everything, in a state of near total collapse. But wait, it actually gets worse. Before you even spend $1 of that $183 billion, there's this massive number to deal with. $150 billion in debt that Venezuela already owes. So basically, any money that might come out of the ground is already promised to someone else. So you start to see the problem, right? The economic prize is actually a financial black hole. It would take a decade and hundreds of billions of dollars just to fix the infrastructure. And even if you did all that, every penny of revenue would get swallowed up by creditors, like China, Russia, and private bondholders. The idea that oil will just pay for it? According to the source, that's pure fantasy. So, the legal case is a mess. The economics just don't add up. So what happens on the world stage? Well, the source details an immediate, severe global backlash, and it starts right in America's own backyard. Brazil, the regional heavyweight, immediately condemns the action in the strongest possible terms. When President Lula da Silva says this crossed an unacceptable line, that's basically signaling the death of cooperation in the hemisphere. I mean, if the U.S. can do this to Venezuela, who's next? And this is just stunning. Colombia, historically Washington's closest ally in the entire region, has a visceral reaction. President Petro warning that he'd take up arms if the U.S. invaded his country? Wow, that's a shocking break from decades of partnership. The message from Latin America is loud and clear. This is a return to gunboat diplomacy, and they want no part of it. So if the U.S. and its allies are losing from this, who's winning? Well, America's chief adversaries. The source argues this is a massive strategic gift to both China and Russia. For China, it's a huge propaganda victory. They get to paint the U.S. as an imperial aggressor and style themselves as the defenders of the global South. And Russia? They get to use this to justify their own invasions, deflect criticism, and hey, maybe even help fuel an insurgency to bleed the U.S. dry in a Venezuelan quagmire.
And the fallout isn't just diplomatic. It hits right at the foundation of U.S. financial power. Think about it. When the U.S. uses its own justice system to seize a country's assets and arrest its leader, it sends a chilling message to the rest of the world. Your assets parked in the U.S. might not be safe. The source argues this would pour gasoline on the fire of de-dollarization, as countries everywhere start looking for sanction-proof places to put their money.
So you pull all of these different threads together, the legal chaos, the economic trap, the global backlash, and the analysis comes to a really stark conclusion. It argues this event wouldn't just be a foreign policy crisis. It would be the last nail in the coffin for the American century. Militarily, the U.S. finds itself completely stuck. The source points to Venezuela's defense doctrine, which translates to war of all the people. It's a strategy designed for exactly this kind of situation. It's not about winning a conventional war. It's about using local knowledge, armed paramilitary groups, and dense urban slums to drag a superior military into a long, bloody, and unwinnable insurgency. It is a nightmare scenario. But maybe the most devastating blow, the one you can never really recover from, is to America's image. This site just captures it perfectly. The perception of the U.S. could transform overnight, from being a flawed but kind of well-intentioned global policeman to being seen as a purely predatory hegemon that just takes what it wants by force. You just can't get that kind of soft power back. So ultimately, the analysis concludes that this isn't just one failure. It's 4 fatal trends all crashing into each other at the same time. You've got moral bankruptcy from the simple oil grab narrative. You have total hemispheric alienation. You're basically validating the global agendas of China and Russia. And on top of all that, you're committing yourself to a fiscally and militarily draining quagmire. Together, the source argues, they spell the end of an era. And the analysis leaves us with this final, really haunting thought. It argues that this hypothetical operation isn't the moment the U.S. liberated Venezuela, but the moment it liberated the entire world from the illusion of its own benevolence. And that just raises the ultimate question. After a fall like that, what on earth comes next?